Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today, Sales Pipeline Risk Management in the Sales Cloud. This webinar is being recorded, and the link will be emailed to all participants by tomorrow. During the presentation, we encourage all participants to enter any questions you may have in the chat window to your left, and the presenters will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. We have two presenters for this webinar, Thomas Ariol and Velu Palani. Thomas is the founder and CEO of Nimble Apps Limited, the company behind Salesclic. Salesclic is a risk management application for sales pipeline. It received Salesforce's Customer Choice Award for Analytics in 2012. Velu is the CEO and Senior Salesforce.com Solution Architect at Global Tech and Resources. Velu has over 12 years of experience in using Salesforce.com. He enjoys helping companies to grow using Salesforce.com business platform. With this note, I will now hand it over to Thomas Ariol and ask him to please begin the webinar. Thomas?
Okay, hello everyone, this is Thomas here. So let's start with a few stats that you can see on the slide. Lots of time and resources are devoted to generating leads, and there is a general belief that once you have qualified the leads and they are transformed into opportunities in your pipeline, well, basically the hard work is done, and the stats that you see on screen show you that this is actually not the case. There is an issue with pipeline risk, and that issue is not just a matter of compliance. If you don't control the risk in your pipeline, your performance will suffer, and worst of all, your credibility will be affected. So let's discuss pipeline risk. The first thing we need to do is to actually define pipeline risk. And our suggestion is that pipeline risk has three main components, which are highlighted on that slide. The first is bad data. The second is what we call dicey opportunities, opportunities that don't reflect the reality of the business. And the third is inaccurate forecasts. So what we're going to do during this webinar is spend some time on each of these factors and explain how to control them in Salesforce. So let's start with data quality, and I think Velu will have a few comments to make.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. As Thomas said, how do we reduce the risk in your sales pipeline? As a consultant, whenever I go and visit a customer, the first question is that how healthy is my sales pipeline? The answer to that question, I would pose a question back. How healthy is your pipeline? To answer the question, what kind of risk factors behind your pipeline? One of the risk factors, as you see on the slide, is your data quality. The data quality is a very loose term. At the same time, there are things that you can do to manage or maintain your data quality. One of them is clean your data, right? So keep your data clean all the time. It has to be clean. If your data is not clean, your adoption will suffer. How do you do that? There are a lot of ways you can do. A couple of things that I have noted down on the slides. Check for duplicates. The next one would be loading the relevant data. Every time when I visit, some customers ask for, okay, can I load all the data into my system? My recommendation is always load the relevant data. If you're loading the historic data, you might not even be looking into it in the future, so load as relevant as possible. And in terms of filling out all the fields in your objects or database, make sure that you're only loading the right relevant data. The next thing would be, what if I don't know whether I should create an account, whether I should create a contact? Some companies don't use the leads object effectively. Some of them use, some of them don't. My recommendation is if you have some piece of information that you want to capture, put that in the lead object, qualify, verify, clean it, then you convert them into an opportunity when the lead is qualified. So that is something that I would strongly recommend using the leads object. And the next slide, as you see here, is auditing your database, auditing your system or CRM system. You need to have some kind of process to the cleanup. How soon I should be auditing, how should I be cleaning, it's completely up to your company's terms or the company's ability to use the auditing process. You should have a process to audit your CRM, and you can create some reports to verify the existing data. And then once you verify the data, you can always load, clean, and export, clean, and load the data. So that's something that I would strongly recommend. If you don't have a process, you should have one process in place. And then sometimes when it comes to the data quality, we miss a big piece is involving the top management. CRM is a business system. That's where you track your money in terms of your revenue, not necessarily tracking your expenses, but you are tracking your revenue. So when you talk about the revenue, the top management it's a good idea, and it is not even a good idea. It is the right thing to do to involving the top management when you make some decisions on cleaning your data. Why you would need to? Because they help you to make some key decisions, and then they should also involve in doing the verification on a regular basis, looking at the key metrics on a regular basis, either logging into the Salesforce, or they should be getting an email, dashboards and reports, or they can even look into the mobile phones. So that is involving the top management is very crucial in managing your data quality. So the third point that I would mention is that the administrative quality. So keeping the data in terms of correct information, right, accurate information, consistent information, that's more of an administrative level. If the information is not accurate, it's not consistent, it's not accessible, obviously it's no use for the sales users or even the whoever is involved in the CRM systems. Large organizations, as you see it, they use some automated processes, use tools that are very good in terms of cleaning your data. For example, demand tools, something that I recommend. And then the Informatica, if you have a large organization and you have a legacy data that you want to share back and forth, you can use the Informatica for ETL processes. And there are some free tools available too in AppExchange. You can take a look at the tools that are available in AppExchange. So when it comes to economic quality, I think I would transition over to Thomas, and he will give us a better understanding about the economic quality of the data.
Yeah, because the thing about data quality is that it's not only administrative data quality that matters. So it's not only having the right telephone number or the right salutation for your contacts. Data quality also have an economic or a business signification. And here I think what we mean is data that may be formally accurate but doesn't reflect the reality of the corresponding opportunities. So that could be, for example, closing dates that are too optimistic, or opportunity amounts that are not realistic, etc. And apart from discussions between sales reps and managers, the best way to spot these issues with business data quality is to check your current pipeline against historical trends. So leverage your Salesforce database to spot inconsistencies. You can do this with custom Force.com developments, or you can do this with selected AppExchange applications. So that being said, let's move to opportunity management, which is the second element that influences risk in the pipeline. The absolute minimum that you can do to improve opportunity management in Salesforce is to implement a proper sales process. And it sounds obvious, but you wouldn't believe the number of companies that operate without sales process stages. There are two options in Salesforce when you want to do this. The first is to define pipeline stages. So this is the easy way. You just go to the opportunity object, define the stages. This is the example that you see on the left of that slide. There's another way that, with a name that's a bit misleading, it's called sales processes in Salesforce. That's the example that you see on the right of the present slide. The sales process in Salesforce is basically a pipeline that you have defined out of a central pool of pipeline stages. So defining a sales process in Salesforce goes in two steps. The first step is to define the pipeline stages that are part of your central pool or reserve of stages. And then out of this central pool, allocate the stages to the various pipelines that you want to manage. So you could have any number of pipelines with potentially different structures. A pipeline with 3 stages, a pipeline with 4 stages, etc., depending on the reality of the business that's underneath this. Salesforce is a great tool for automating business processes. Sales processes are one example of this. And actually, you can define in Salesforce the mandatory conditions for moving an opportunity from one stage to another. And this is what Salesforce calls validation rules. For example, you could decide that in order to move an opportunity from stage 2 to stage 3, you have to have the correct amount. Or you could decide that in order to move an opportunity from the last stage of the pipeline to closed lost, you need to define an explanation for that loss. Our advice is to resist the temptation to define validation rules for everything that could happen in the pipeline. Our advice is to use validation rules sparingly. The reason for this is there is a trade-off between validation rules and Salesforce adoption. So there is a trade-off between validation rules and data quality. And for example, I think a best practice is to restrict validation rules to your hard compliance requirements as opposed to your soft process recommendations. That will improve data quality and reduce pipeline risk. Vedu?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. If you go back to one slide back here, I just want to add one small in here. In a lot of companies, I'm sure they do have some kind of sales processes. Some of them are well defined. Some of them are loosely defined. What I have noticed in my experience, some companies try to combine multiple sales processes into one opportunity page layout. I'm talking some technical term here. Pardon me if it is too technical. But the lesson that I learned over the years and the recommendation I make, keep your sales process as simple as possible. And if you are selling multiple services with a completely different audience, different target customers, keep a different sales process, having a different page layout. That certainly helps. So managing the risk of your pipeline is not, it's just focusing on the data quality, right? If the quality of the data is missing, everything else is suffering. So I certainly recommend that keep your sales process as simple as possible. And if you need to keep separate sales process for a set of products and services. So
yeah, that's right, Vedu. And something that I often see, for example, with prospects and clients is companies that are trying to manage new business and existing business in the same pipeline. And it's very difficult because both sales processes are very different, understandably. And when you manage them in the same pipeline, you basically skew your pipeline statistics, and that prevents you from generating the right forecasts, the right analysis.
Thank you, Thomas. All right. So the next question is always people ask us, okay, how do you monitor your pipeline, right? You enter the opportunities that they go into your pipeline. How do you monitor them? There is, in Salesforce, not too many ways you can monitor the opportunities. One, I can see it through your reports or through dashboards. That's the only two ways you can monitor your opportunities. Obviously, the reports and dashboards can be sent via email, chatter, and so on and so forth. But monitoring opportunity line by line, if it is on the report, or even up at the dashboard, you need to click on the dashboard, look at the details. This is where sometimes me as a sales manager, I do miss the line. Let's say I have a report which has got 100 opportunities, which are all good opportunities. What if I don't pay attention to one of them, I skip it? Remember, statistics says that 50% of the opportunities slip through the cracks. So this is the danger of monitoring the opportunity in a static way. You may have to check it, double check it, triple check it, make sure that you are paying attention to every opportunity, whether you are a salesperson or a sales manager. So it is, I don't think there is any other way. It's a hard work. Make sure that we all pay attention to every opportunity which is in the pipeline and move the opportunity from one stage to another stage. All right, so the next topic is going to be interesting, where Thomas is going to add to us how do we do dynamic opportunity monitoring. Thomas?
Yeah, so these reports that Salesforce generates are quite good. They have one weakness, I think, which is that they're quite static. The reason for this is that Salesforce as a software, as an architecture, is not that good at taking the time factor into account. But in sales, the time factor is critical because obviously, closing the same opportunity tomorrow or in 6 months has dramatically different consequences. So the goal is to try to take that time factor into account. When you do this, you get a much more dynamic view of pipeline risk at both the micro level and the macro level. And this is what we illustrate here on that slide with actually 2 screenshots that come from Salesclic. At the micro level, when you take the time factor into account, you can do interesting stuff with opportunities. You can identify opportunities with a closing date that is too optimistic, given the sales velocity of the pipeline, and a closing date that is too close. Again, given the sales velocity of the pipeline, you can define and identify stagnation, opportunities that are moving more slowly in the pipeline than the average, than the historical average for that pipeline, etc. Doing this improves data quality tremendously. At the macro level, so looking at the pipeline as a whole, you can also do very interesting things. You can define a target, a revenue target for your chosen period, and then analyze the gaps in your pipeline between what you currently have and what you would need to have given your track record in order to reach the target. In the example that you have on the screen on the right, you can see a little chart with blue bars that represent the amounts that I currently have in my pipeline stage by stage, and red dots that represent the amounts that I would need given my track record in order to reach the target of 12,000 that I defined. And I can see that in stage 4, I have a gap between the actual number and the ideal number, and that gap is my risk for that pipeline.
Thomas, I have one question here.
Sure.
When I look at the screen, I do see that number 4, there is a gap between what you have and what you're supposed to have. The red dot indicates that what you're supposed to have. The blue dot or the blue bar says that that is what you already have. So many opportunities in that stage 4. So if I am a sales manager, I'm looking at the chart, understanding the data quality, understanding the risk of your pipeline. If the opportunity, some opportunities, do stay longer in one stage.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if the opportunity, similar opportunity should take similar amount of time to close one way or other, correct? So
yeah, that's right.
how does it affect the health, the risk, how does it increase or reduce the risk of the pipeline?
Yeah, I think what you need to do, Velu, is you need to choose the dimensions for your analysis that are relevant to your business. So if you know as a sales manager that your sales process is different depending of your product line or your client type or maybe your deal amount, then you will choose these dimensions as the dimensions for your analysis. And there you will have significant pipeline stats that you can use to de-risk your pipeline.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's move to the third risk factor, which is forecasting accuracy. So sales forecasting in Salesforce comes in two flavors. There are two standard forecasting methodologies in Salesforce. The first is the weighted pipeline. The second is what Salesforce calls forecast categories and is sometimes called the Cisco methodology. So let's explain both. The weighted pipeline is very easy to understand. It's just the total amount of the opportunities in your pipeline expected to close in a given period times the closing probabilities that you have chosen for these opportunities. So it's a weighted average. Forecast categories are a bit more difficult to understand, and we've tried to illustrate here how they work. Forecast categories are basically a correspondence that you establish between your pipeline stages and forecast categories. So here, in that little chart on the slide, we have on the left in blue a pipeline with 3 stages. And on the right in green, we have the 2 forecast categories that are defined in Salesforce called best case and commit. And you can see with the arrows that I have established a correspondence between my pipeline stages and forecast categories. I have decided that my commit equals stage 3 and that my best case equals stage 3 plus stage 2. That's it. That's how it works. The advantage of forecast categories over the weighted pipeline is they don't use closing probabilities, and we know that closing probabilities are a major source of forecasting mistakes. However, both methodologies share one weakness, which is that both methodologies are entirely judgmental. They rely entirely on the judgments of sales reps and sales managers. And in a minute, we'll discuss how you can mitigate this. But before this, we'd like to focus on one really important aspect of sales forecasting, which is measuring forecast reliability. And Velu will explain how you can do this in Salesforce with native features. And then I will discuss how you can do this with state-of-the-art methodologies and applications.
Thank you, Thomas. So as we all know, forecast is not the quota or target. So when sometimes it's confusing term, okay, what's my forecast? Forecast is a derived or calculated information Salesforce presents when you have a quota and you have an actual that comes from opportunity. So when you are comparing your actual versus quota or actual versus target, so then you will be able to understand the forecast. The forecast is about the future. What can I close tomorrow, day after tomorrow, the week from now, quarter from now, next quarter, or the following quarter, following year. So that tells you what is likely to close based on your pipeline, and then it gives you the ability to understand the actual versus target. So forecast, our common mistakes sometimes people get confused between actual versus forecast. When you run a report, closed won and closed lost, that's your actual pipeline that you closed. That's your revenue that you closed for the month or for the given period. So the forecasting is a very tricky, it is challenging for a lot of people. But if you do it right, this will give you peace of mind. It gives you ability to understand what's coming up in my pipeline, which is likely to close whatever the period that you set. So there are reports out there. I would strongly recommend that the basic reports that you can look at. You can look at the forecast summary, quota versus actual, and so on and so forth. There are reports, quite a few standard reports. You can go to Salesforce and you see the screen. You should be able to run and see it. But when it comes to the state of the art, I will give it to Thomas. That's his area.
Yes, yeah. I mean, here again, the difference between native Salesforce functionality and state-of-the-art capabilities is, again, it's taking into account the time factor. When you take into account the time factor, when you do a bit of digging and programming using basic Salesforce data, you can do two things. First, you can do some time traveling, display your pipeline on various dates, potentially any date in the past, which is the case in Salesclic. And displaying your pipelines on various dates, you'll be able to identify very precisely, what changed in your pipeline, what the forecast was on a given date, what the forecast is today, and that way analyze the variations of your forecast in time and measure forecast accuracy much more effectively. Something else that you can do when you have this ability to handle the time factor using raw Salesforce data is for each forecast that you generate, calculate a trust factor. The trust factor indicates how much you can trust that forecast given your track record. The important thing here is that obviously being 95% accurate one day before the end of the quarter and 60 days before the end of the quarter doesn't have the same value. So you want to be able to calculate that trust factor, taking into account the moment you're at in your quarter. When you do this, you have a very good view of what you can expect from your pipeline, because not only do you have forecasts that come from a reliable sales process, but you can also calculate how much you can trust these forecasts given your track record.
Thomas, when we go back to the previous screen and the trust factor, that's where comes back. So the same concept applies, that the similar opportunity takes a similar time to close it. But some salespeople add opportunity. They wait till the last minute to enter the opportunity and close it. They may not even go through certain steps to close the deal, right? So how does that affect the trust factor?
Okay, it's a good question, Velu. And here what you want to do is you want to select the algorithms that will actually identify these patterns in your Salesforce data. So that when, for example, a sales rep has a pattern of creating opportunities at the last minute and then closing them immediately, that pattern will be recognized and taken into account when generating the forecast.
So if that is the case, I mean, certainly that it's a good point that it recognizes it. But isn't it a good idea to train the salespeople to use the process, have them enter from the stage one till the closing of the opportunity? So that basically records your information in the Salesforce forecast table. Okay, how long does it take for an opportunity to move from one stage to the next stage? So what is your recommendation in terms of entering the opportunity, tracking them, moving from one stage to another stage? What do you recommend?
Actually, I'm going to discuss this on the next slide. So
okay. All right.
It's a good introduction to the next slide. Here what I wanted to discuss is the combination of judgmental and quantitative forecasts, because it's very relevant in the B2B context. We've already seen that the two native forecasting methodologies in Salesforce are entirely judgmental. Well, we know that, unfortunately, human judgments are biased. First of all, we humans have tremendous cognitive difficulties with time and probabilities, which is kind of unfortunate for forecasting because these are two essential dimensions of forecasts. We also know that we tend to be optimistic, again, that affects forecasting. And there is something called the availability bias that also affects forecasting. Availability bias means that when we formulate a judgment, we tend to formulate that judgment based on the most recent information available to us, and not on the entire set of data that's available to us. So for all these reasons, judgments are biased. And for a very long time, the state of the art in forecasting was to say that, okay, judgments are biased, so let's discard them altogether and focus on quantitative analysis. Focus exclusively on quantitative analysis. That state of the art has changed during the past 10 years. Now the consensus is that judgments are biased, but they also contain precious information. In the context of sales, sales reps know the market. They are aware of the conversations with prospects. They know the products. They know the competitors, etc. This is all very precious information that you should take into account when you generate your forecast. So the goal is to combine these judgments with forecasts that are based on the analysis of your data. This is how you will get the best results. And another advantage of this, Velu, to answer your question, is when you're able to compare forecasts that are based on multiple methodologies, analyzing the gaps will help you understand the strengths and weaknesses of your sales reps when it comes to pipeline management and sales forecasting. So there is a learning aspect to it as well.
Very good. Thank you.
So next question is, okay, well, let's try to use quantitative forecasts as well as human judgments. Where should the data come from? There are two approaches. The first is to try to use external data. The second is to use internal data. Using external data is kind of a big data approach. So as a sales manager, you will try to aggregate data not only from your Salesforce pipeline, but also potentially from your emailing activity, the tweets of your competitors, clients, prospects, maybe data from Facebook, from external sources, etc., and use this to complement your judgmental forecasts. That's the first approach. The second is called the algorithmic modeling approach. The goal here is to take the data that you have in your Salesforce database, find patterns that can be used to improve forecast accuracy and pipeline understanding in that data that you already have. This is, for example, the approach that we are taking with Salesclic. I think that the first approach, the big data approach, is more relevant to the marketing cycle than to the sales cycle, because marketing naturally generates large amounts of data that are very well suited to big data analysis. The second approach, in my opinion, is more suited to the sales cycle. But again, the goal is to combine judgmental and quantitative forecasts. This is how you will get the best results, and this is how you will de-risk your pipeline when it comes to forecast accuracy.
So when we talk about the big data, so that's primarily when we say it is for marketing, it applies to the lead, right? So the marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
All right, so let's conclude that webinar. the conclusion that I wanted to make is this one. The conclusion is that it actually pays to work on this stuff. This is data on that slide that we've collected from Salesclic users, Salesclic clients. And we know then that when you focus on pipeline risk with the right tools, with the right processes, you find a significant increase in data quality. You also reduce sales cycle length, and that's because sales reps and managers will focus on the right opportunities, will allocate their time on the right opportunities, not the ones that are likely to be close lost. And of course, we know that there is a significant increase in forecast accuracy. So it pays to focus on pipeline risk management. Okay.
So, I have a couple of things that I want to add here. One, when you talk about the data quality, we've seen the risk of having the wrong data, right? So the sales cycle, so what I have experienced personally as well as with my customers that I work with, number one, that you should keep your data current, right? So we all agree to it. And the sales cycle, especially when you're defining the sales stages, make sure that you have the stages that are consistent in terms of some qualifying questions. So you're moving from one stage to another stage. So try to have some minimum standard qualification questions. That will really improve your quality as well as the sales cycle. So that's something that I would do. If you keep your data quality and if you're moving your opportunity from one stage to the next stage consistently, I think your forecast will certainly be, the accuracy of the forecast will reflect on your reports. So that's my thought process on improving the forecast accuracy.
Okay. So it's time for questions.
All right. Thank you, Thomas and Velu. We do have some questions here from the participants. Okay, let's see. The first question goes to Thomas. What is Salesclic, and can you do a demo?
All right. So it's an application that integrates with Salesforce and that focuses on pipeline visualization, pipeline analysis, and pipeline forecasting. I won't do a demo now, but if you want a demo, my contact details are at the end of the presentation, and I'd be happy to schedule one in the next few days at your convenience.
Okay. The next question here is for you, Velu. What Salesforce reports and dashboard do you recommend for auditing?
Let's see, reports, when you look at the reports, there are some standard reports. When it comes to the dashboards, I see quite a few free dashboards available on the App Exchange, especially for the sales executives to look at their dashboard. One of the things I'm sure everybody knows is the actual versus target. There is a nice chart that you can do it. That's the gauge that you can see it. That's a dashboard. So when you want to talk about specific to the reports, I recommend about 4 reports. One, forecast history report. The second one would be forecast summary, quarter versus actual, and opportunity forecast. So these are the 4 standard reports that you can use to understand your forecast and do some auditing. And so of course, you can always customize these reports.
Okay, thank you, Velu. The next question is, what is the best practice for when to create an opportunity in Salesforce?
That's a good question. What's the best practice when to create an opportunity? This is always a challenging question for me as well as the customers that I work with. It all depends on the company's process. But my suggestion, my recommendation would be create an opportunity when you know the customer is interested in buying a product or a service either from you or from your competition. And when you create an opportunity, there are stages you go through, right? So if the best practice I would always recommend, you would know the customer point, you would know to some extent what would be their, not necessarily you would need to know the budget, but there is a scope and there is an interest for your product or similar product or service that you sell. So that's when you create the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a good answer, Valu, and let me give my answer, which is it's the criteria that we use here at Salesclic to qualify leads into opportunities. So basically for us, a lead is a company that has shown interest because it has visited our website or downloaded some of our white papers, but that we haven't talked to yet. And for a lead to become an opportunity, we actually need to talk to that company and check, by ourselves via a significant conversation that there is indeed an interest. That's the criteria that we use.
Thank you, Thomas. The next question is for you, Thomas. Can you explain the trust factor that you showed in one of the slides?
Yeah, it's actually, conceptually, it's quite simple. What we do is we look at every day in the past, so every day in your pipeline history in Salesforce. And for every day in the past, we measure the forecast as it was expressed on that day, and we calculate the difference between that forecast and what actually happened. So for every day in the past, we have a forecasting mistake. The greater the forecasting mistake, on average, the lower the trust factor.
So it is basically the slide that we saw was the trust factor was mostly created based on the quantitative data.
Yeah, exactly. It is an analysis of the data that you have in Salesforce. And as I said, the good thing about this is it takes the time factor into account. So it gives a different value to the forecast that you make depending on how close you are to the end of the quarter.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we'll have one more question. How do organizations use Salesclic?
How do organizations use Salesclic? Okay, so first of all, they install it in the Salesforce organization. It's quite fast. It takes 5 minutes. Once Salesclic is installed, right from the first minute, it leverages the historical data that's in the Salesforce database and starts generating stats on the pipeline and forecasts. And then basically the general idea is that the most important information for pipeline risk management should not be segregated in reports and dashboards. It should be displayed directly in the pipeline so that people can't miss it. And this is what we do. We have a very visual representation of the sales pipeline that people can use to update their opportunities. And in that representation, we also display visual alerts for data quality, for dicey opportunities, and we display the forecast that we calculate.
Okay, great. And we have another question for you, Valu. What is the best practice when it comes to keeping the data clean, or how often should I clean my data?
That's a good question. Thank you. The best practice to keep the data clean, certainly prevention is better than cure. So before you load the data, make sure that you check for duplicates, load the relevant data, as you see it on the slide that in the beginning of the presentation. So you don't load the data if you're not sure about the quality. Number one, when you enter the data, you always make sure you check for duplicates. How often do you clean? How often do you do the auditing? It depends on your company's requirement. Some companies do every quarter. Some companies do once in 6 months. And my recommendation is you do it at least once in 6 months. You clean the data. And to clean the data, certainly the best way to start is to run the report. Some of the key metrics of your sales or delivery or your marketing metrics, run the report, review the reports. Once you review the reports and then you verify them, load them into an Excel sheet or whatever that you want, wherever you want to load to, clean it, then put it back into the system. So that's my recommendation.
All right. That's about it with the questions. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining with us. As promised earlier, we will be emailing you the link of today's webinar recording by tomorrow to all participants. And thank you, Thomas and Velu.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.